After eons of frustration, man did fly. It was the year 1783 AD when man first freed himself from the bonds of earth and rose to heights once reserved for winged creatures alone. He first ascended toward the heavens, suspended from a fabric bag filled with heated air. It wasn't long before the interest in ballooning became widespread, and its military possibilities were considered by many countries, including the United States. During the American Civil War, the Union Army used balloons for observation purposes. In the last half of the 19th century, the interests of many experimenters shifted from the lighter-than-air balloons to the glider. Visionaries considered the feasibility of adding a mechanical means of locomotion to the glider. Their ultimate goal was to develop a glider which could use some means of power for flight, a man-carrying aircraft. A technological breakthrough occurred with the invention of the high-speed internal combustion engine. Near the end of the century, the high-speed engine was married to the glider. The result was the birth of the airplane. In 1903, two imaginative bicycle mechanics felt they had a heavier-than-air machine which could carry a man aloft in sustained, controlled flight. Wilbur and Orville Wright, after 4 years of experimentation, gave the glider a water-cooled 12-horsepower engine which they designed themselves. The engine powered two chain-driven pusher-type propellers. December 17, 1903 was a cold, windy day at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. By the toss of a coin, Orville won the chance to become the first man in history to fly under power. The first flight, covering a distance of 120 feet, lasted only 12 seconds. 4 flights were made that day, and the last flight covered 852 feet in 59 seconds. Because of the bleak December weather and a lack of fanfare, only 5 people witnessed those first historic flights. The Wrights returned home to Dayton, Ohio to continue their experiments. For one thing, they had to refine the controlling devices in order to turn the airplane in a safe manner. They began to patent certain features of their flying machines. In 1907, the Wright brothers' achievements were brought to the personal attention of President Theodore Roosevelt. The potential of the airplane as an instrument for national defense was pointed out. In December of that year, Signal Corps Specification number 486 was issued. It provided that the government would buy a flying machine from the lowest bidder. A flying machine which could attain a speed of at least 40 miles per hour and carry 2 persons with a combined weight of 350 pounds, a distance of 125 miles. It also stipulated that it would have to pass an endurance flight test of at least 1 hour while being steered in all directions and remain under perfect control. In all, 41 proposals were received, but eventually the Wrights and 2 others were given the go-ahead to build the first American military airplane. The Wrights were the only ones to deliver. They signed the contract on February 10, 1908, and 200 days later, Orville delivered the Wright Flyer to Fort Myer, Virginia, where initial flight testing began. There were several setbacks, including a crash which required the construction of a new airplane. The crash took the life of Lieutenant Thomas E. Selfridge, who was flying as Orville Wright's passenger. He became the Army's first aviation fatality. Orville sustained severe injuries in the smash-up. On July 27, 1909, Orville made the first official test flight. Lieutenant Frank P. Long went along as a passenger. The flight established a world's record, 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 40 seconds. The final test on July 30 was the speed flight. This time, Orville's passenger was Lieutenant Benjamin D. Fulloy. The average speed of 42.5 miles per hour won the Wrights a bonus of $5,000 over the contract price of $25,000. The Wrights airplane was officially accepted by the Army on the 2nd of August 1909 and was designated Signal Corps Airplane Number 1. The Army's contract included a stipulation that the Wrights teach 2 officers to fly the machine. In October of 1909, Wilbur trained the Army's first aviators. Lieutenants Frederick E. Humphreys and Frank P. Lom soloed after just over 3 hours of flying time. But by the end of the year, the Signal Corps lost these first 2 pilots when they were returned to their regular Army assignments. In 1910, Lieutenant Falloy became the first correspondence school pilot. He learned to fly the airplane while getting instructions from the Wrights by mail. Until 1911, the Army had only 1 airplane and 1 pilot, Falloy. In March of that year, Congress appropriated $125,000 for Army aeronautics. 5 new airplanes were ordered, 3 from the Wrights and 2 from Glenn Curtiss. The Curtiss airplane was also a pusher type, but it had only 1 seat. Little by little, more men were taught to fly. By the end of 1913, 24 pilots were authorized to wear military aviator badges. Among them was Lieutenant Henry Hap Arnold, who first learned to fly at the Wright School near Dayton, then later qualified as a military pilot at College Park, Maryland. During this period, many flying schools were established. Because of the favorable flying conditions in California, Glenn Curtiss moved west and established a school in San Diego. It grew into the Army's first permanent aviation school. 2 overseas training schools were also established, one in Hawaii and the other in the Philippines. Near Manila, Lieutenant Frank Lom opened a flying school with 1 airplane, a Wright Model Type B. At College Park, Maryland, Army pilots pioneered in several areas. The advantages of 2-way radio telegraphy were demonstrated. Experiments were conducted in aerial photography. Night flying techniques were also developed during this period. The first American bomb sight and bomb-dropping device was demonstrated. Experiments were conducted on the firing of a low-recoil machine gun from an airplane. Named the Lewis gun, it eventually became standard armament on Allied planes during World War I. This was truly a period of experimentation in American aviation, and in spite of a lack of funds and other obstacles, Army aviation had made progress. In 1913, the Signal Corps realized that the time was ripe to establish an air organization capable of military operations in the field. At Texas City, Texas, the 1st Aero Squadron was organized as an interim measure to meet an emergency situation. The squadron flew its 9 airplanes with the 2nd Division, guarding the Mexican border. This organization was officially organized in September 1914. In 1914, Congress authorized the establishment of an aviation section in the Signal Corps and appropriated $250,000 to expand the aerial forces. The expansion meant more men and more planes. Faster and safer airplanes were built. The Army's first tractor-type aircraft, delivered in 1912, was a hydroplane built by the Burgess Company. The propeller was mounted in front of the pilot rather than behind him. By 1914, the pusher-type airplanes were declared dangerous and were removed from use. They were replaced by new Curtiss J tractor-type planes. Glenn Curtiss's tractor-type biplane eventually evolved into the famous series of Curtiss Jennies, which were used for training during World War I. The United States Army witnessed the airplane developing gradually until it emerged as a true military weapon. When World War I began, less than 11 years after the success of the Wright brothers, the airplane began to influence the histories of many nations. Soon after World War I erupted in Europe, it became evident that the airplane was forcing a permanent change in warfare. By the time America entered the war on April 6, 1917, the airplane was well established as a military weapon. But the United States had only a small number of pilots and very few training planes. There were no bombers, fighters, or other combat-type airplanes. American air power ranked 14th in the world. Secretary of War Baker urged the nation to back the buildup of a vast air fleet. Congress rushed through a bill appropriating $640 million for the buildup of American air strength, and President Wilson signed it on July 24, 1917. A large-scale production of airplanes was initiated. Among them was the Curtiss JN-4, called the Jenny. This two-seater was selected as the standard pilot training plane. The British-designed de Havilland 4 was adopted as the standard frontline bomber plane for combat. The famous American Liberty engine was developed to power the DH-4, and it became one of America's greatest contributions to aviation during that era. 543 of the American-built DH-4s saw combat before war's end, serving a dual role as observation plane and bomber. Not only were airplanes needed in large quantities, but men had to be trained to fly and maintain them. The air war in Europe stirred America's young men. There was no shortage of volunteers. In the year following the declaration of war, over 38,000 of America's youth had volunteered for flying training with the Army. Training them was a mammoth undertaking. Successful applicants were sent first to ground school for an intensive 8-week course. Then they began flight training. This was divided into 3 phases: dual instruction, solo practice, and cross-country training. Successful completion of these phases earned the flyer his commission and the right to wear the wings of a military aviator. When stateside training was completed, the new pilots were sent overseas, where they were taught to fly combat planes. Although the first American flying unit didn't arrive in Europe until September 1917, some Americans had already flown combat with the British and French beginning in 1915. Many of them flew with the famous Lafayette Escadrille. After the United States entered the war, many of these pilots transferred to the Air Service. The nucleus of the 103rd Aero Squadron was made up of former members of the Lafayette Escadrille. The 103rd was the first American squadron to see action as a unit. The 94th Pursuit Squadron became the first American-trained flying unit to see combat. The 94th was the famous Hat-in-the-Ring Squadron, later commanded by Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, who became America's top ace in World War I with 26 victories. More American squadrons joined those already committed to battle. As the intensity of the war increased, so did the involvement of the American Air Services. As an example, American pilots flew over 3,300 sorties during a 5-day period in September of 1918. Great battles raged, both in the air and on the ground. The Germans attempted to smash the Allies before the influence of American forces could swing the tide of the war. It took large concentrations of air power to counter the German effort. The Allies planned an all-out effort to wipe out the large German salient at San Miguel. The battle plan included the first independent attack by the American Army, and it called for a large air offensive. Colonel Billy Mitchell was to command the largest aggregation of air forces ever committed, up to that time, to a single operation during the war. Flying both American-built DH-4s as well as French and English-built planes, the Americans and French enjoyed numerical superiority for the first time. On the opening day of the battle, Mitchell committed 1,500 planes. He proved his theories on the effectiveness of concentrated air power as his aircraft entered combat on the 3rd day of the battle. Bombing and strafing helped to demoralize German ground troops and was a major factor in forcing the Germans out of the San Miguel salient. Mitchell's aerial tactics were repeated during the Meuse-Argonne offensive in late September, accomplishing the greatest single aerial triumph of the war. The Allied Air Armada fought off waves of Germany's best planes and pilots. The already weakened Germany was unable to launch a planned counteroffensive. The defeat of Germany loomed closer. By the end of the war, November 11, 1918, 71 Americans qualified as aces, each credited with shooting down or sharing in the destruction of 5 or more German planes. Their total score was 450 planes and 50 balloons. A few of the never-to-be-forgotten American aces were Lieutenant Frank Luke, Major Raoul Lufberry, and the ace of aces, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. 6 months before the war ended, an event took place in the States which influenced the evolution of American air power. On May 15th, Army flyers inaugurated America's first airmail service. In the years following, airmail pilots established routes and a system of airways that are still being utilized. Many ex-military flyers wanted to stay in aviation, but there were very few jobs for civilian pilots. Some bought surplus Army planes and flew them anywhere they could make a dollar. Carnivals, county fairs, exhibitions. These barnstormers often made money by taking passengers for their first plane ride. Some earned a living by stunt flying, a very dangerous business which left crowds spellbound. Many of these barnstormers invested in bigger planes and helped develop intercity taxi service, the stepping stones to today's commercial airlines. During the 20s, flyers accepted many challenges. They strived to fly higher, faster, and farther. Builders began to develop better planes, engines, and navigation equipment. Record flights came rapidly. One was the cross-country non-stop flight from New York to California. After 2 unsuccessful attempts, Army Lieutenants McCready and Kelly took off from Long Island in May 1923. Just under 27 hours later, they landed in California, the first flyers to complete a non-stop coast-to-coast flight. 1 year after the record-breaking cross-country flight, 4 specially built Douglas World Cruisers took off from a lake near Seattle on the first leg of an historic flight around the world. 175 days later, 2 of the original 4 Air Service planes returned to Seattle to successfully complete the 26,000-mile journey. By the time the name of the Air Services was changed to the Air Corps in the mid-20s, Army flyers had set numerous records and continued to work for technological advancement. Cold weather testing proved the ability of men and planes to operate in sub-zero temperatures. New speed records were set in 1925 when Lieutenants Cy Bettis and Jimmy Doolittle won the Pulitzer and Schneider Cup races respectively within a 2-week span. 1 month after Lindbergh's historic flight in May 1927, another flying achievement was accomplished by 2 Air Corps pilots, Lieutenants L.J. Maitland and A.F. Hegenberger. Taking off from California, they flew a Fokker tri-motor monoplane named the Bird of Paradise, non-stop to Hawaii in 25 hours and 50 minutes. With their destination a mere dot in the Pacific Ocean, their flight demanded exceptional navigation, superb flying skill, and real courage. In 1929, Air Corps flyers established an unofficial world flight endurance record in another tri-motor Fokker named the Question Mark. Using a mid-air refueling technique developed in 1923, aerial fuel transfers were successfully accomplished 43 times, 9 of which were performed at night. The Question Mark, commanded by Major Carl Spatz, and including Captain Ira C. Eaker and Lieutenant Elwood R. Quesada among its crew, stayed aloft for almost 151 hours, landing only after one engine began to give them trouble. The decade of the 20s is often referred to as the Billy Mitchell era. Following World War I, General Mitchell was the chief proponent of air power, and he strongly voiced the opinion that America must maintain strong air defenses. Mitchell believed that bombers would spell the end of sea power. He asked for the opportunity to prove the effectiveness of air power over naval forces. The combined War and Navy departments granted his wish and gave him the chance to prove his theories. On 2 separate occasions, U.S. airplanes carried out attacks on warships that were going to be scuttled or scrapped, including the powerful German battleship Ostfriesland. Mitchell's bombers sank some of the supposedly unsinkables, including the U.S. battleships Alabama, New Jersey, and the Virginia. Many years were to pass before the significance of these bombing tests was fully recognized, as witnessed the destruction of American ships of the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The decade of the 20s spawned many pioneers in aviation. Some of the names high on the list of non-military aviators were Amelia Earhart, Wiley Post, and the Lone Eagle Charles A. Lindbergh. Considering the distinctive progress in aviation in the 20s, it seems justifiable that many historians term this period the golden age of aviation.